Welcome to the Accidental Trainer, a podcast where you'll hear firsthand stories and tips on how to start and grow your training career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us the lovely Chelsea C. Williams. Chelsea is the founder and CEO of Reimagine Talent. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you. I was telling you about my theory, I don't know if we can call it theory, about generations, different intergenerations in the workforce, and that it seems like it sort of falls into these two camps. Either all of Gen Z shows up in this way in the workforce, or that's not right at all. And I want you to help us understand. Others will get offended, right, by these generalizations or stereotypes. So I have a hunch that you do this work and you can put us on the right path. We'll talk about that shortly. Can you fill us in on your origins first? How did you land in your role? What was something accidental that happened along the way?
Yes. So before Reimagine Talent was founded, I spent almost a decade on Wall Street in human resources and talent development. So I was corporate HR, for lack of a better term, sitting in almost every specialist and generalist role within the function. I was one of the few people who wanted to be in the profession since college. I know very few of us. And so the accidental part of my career actually would be that I didn't think that I would then transition on to be an entrepreneur. So I left my corporate HR job, did a fellowship for 3 months called Education Pioneers, which takes people from the professional setting and the corporate professional setting and transitions them into social impact, nonprofit, community organizations. And so I did it for 3 months with Teach for America in adult learning and leadership, loved it, and was like, oh my gosh, there's a world outside of finance to do this work. And that 3 months expanded and turned into other consultative opportunities and training opportunities. And then Reimagine Talent was really born out of that.
Wow. What motivated you to focus your work on intergenerational talent strategies, the Gen Z workforce? What is keeping you energized about this work in this space?
I would say that really the concept and focus on generational strategies and Gen Z came about by sheer observation. So again, spending my career in talent development and human resources, it became very evident to me that there was a change taking place in the workplace, certainly in the workforce, that required us as human resources leaders and talent leaders to think about our people differently. The needs were different, the experiences, the values, the ideals, the concepts around work and purpose were changing right before my eyes as a practitioner, both in my corporate days, but then also when we stepped out to start Reimagine Talent. I noticed the generational frictions at hand. I think about some of the experiences around even reward. What rewards satisfy and entice people in the workplace, from those who were older generations to those who were younger generations coming in. And so for me, I would say it was less of I want to go and explore generations. It was because I saw the clashes, we'll call it that, or the differences in approach. Maybe that's a better word for this audience, that questioned me and questioned my team to ask ourselves, how do we need to flex, shift, and pivot the way that we launch and scale our programs, our policies, and our practices to meet a diverse segment of employees through the lens of generations. And so our work now has obviously expanded to really consider what and how we build generationally connected workplaces, communication, feedback, development strategies, to how organizations need to think about Gen Z, who are the fastest growing segment coming into the workplace today.
Okay, I love it that you were talking about different communication strategies. How do you deliver feedback? What does performance look like? Reward strategies, incentives, engagement. Because to go back to this black or white, all or nothing, which camp, I feel like it's a very popular meme that Gen Z does not like to answer the telephone and you text with them only. And for someone that may be true. And someone else may be deeply offended because they want to hear your voice and they like talking to you. So I cannot help but think, how do you do this work? This is why I'm so curious and interested to talk to you. At first, I just want to maybe squash some of these like assumptions. What's an assumption about early talent that you wish that you could retire? Here's your soapbox to set us straight.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about this, but I will try to make it short and sweet. And I'll preface, I do have one that I want to share with the audience. But what I will say is my team and I have finished about 16 months of taking our content, our data across the country, 30 different organizations. And so we've reached thousands of leaders, people leaders on this very topic. And I can tell you, we typically will start our presentation with this question. When you think of Gen Z in one word, what comes to mind? And without question, every conversation, it is a split room, meaning the responses are half positive and half negative. And so there is a lot of feelings and thoughts and perceptions that people have about this next generation workforce, Gen Z. But what I will say that I am a supporter of their perception around is this concept of their mindset around choice. So some folks will say they are too choosy. They're too picky. Nothing's enough, right? Those are things that we hear. I would actually call it that they are empowered. They are empowered to say that this is what I desire in an employer. This is what I desire in a role. And they are confident that that is important in their journey, their career journey. And so while we may call it choosy, and that could be because we say, or we think about our own experiences where we entered work and it was like, you take what you get and you make the most of it and you keep your head down. I remember those in my days when I graduated. I can remember now working on Wall Street and having managing directors, great intention. They were great people, but they would just say, just keep your head down. Just keep your head down. That was a common language on the floor, the trading floor, when we would support them as HR leaders. And it was this concept of just do what you're doing and just expect that things will come when they're meant to come. And I think that this generation are more empowered to say, this is what I value and this is what I don't. This is what I aspire and want, and this is what I don't. And I think that that is healthy. And so I would say that it is important for employers to kind of shift the perception that choosy and picky could actually be an empowerment towards what matters most.
Interesting. It made me think back to someone who was early in my career. I am an opinionated person. I had a lot of ideas. I wanted to change, blow up this whole project that I was working on. And I got the feedback that was nice, but I needed to earn my stripes and earn my place. And so actually what I had the power to change and work on was going to be much smaller than what I was expecting. What do you think about that? How does this fit into generational strategies and feedback? Is that an example of that culture of someone told her that, right?
Yes.
So she's now passing that on to me?
Yes. Absolutely. Because again, as humans, most of the time we believe that our way and our path is the way and the path, especially when you may have the advantage of more time under your belt, or even you've seen other people professionally or personally who've had a similar journey. Your thought process can be, oh yeah, I had to do X, Y, and Z to get X, Y, and Z. So you certainly couldn't bypass my journey to this promotion, to this role, to this leadership position. That is common. And when you add in the general conversation, and here's really the kicker here, in a society where there is more, and people can sometimes call it the microwave society, right? The Amazon society, the Amazon Prime, which I love, by the way, the 2-day delivery, you get it quickly. There is the perception as times have changed, as technology has advanced, and we can get things more quickly. That is the expectation sometimes that permeates its way into workplaces. And so if you are from an older generation where that was not the case, there can be the perception that, well, they want everything very fast. Where I would actually say, again, I don't know that it is always about wanting it fast. Sometimes it's about transparency. Sometimes it's about, I want to understand how I can get to this next level. I don't want to have to wait 2 or 3 years to understand the path. I want to know it up front. Again, connected to being empowered and understanding.
Yeah, it's a great word for anyone to have. You'd hope that all employees, no matter what generation that you identify with, are empowered. It's making me think of this McKinsey research that came out during maybe 2020 about what was resonating for folks, just mattering and being in the workplace and their preferences. When you were talking about communication strategies and feedback and how folks want to be evaluated for their performance and what's going to incentivize them and motivate them, the McKinsey report was actually talking about tapping into these diverse talent pools and what might matter to, let's say, someone who is a caretaker. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know if it's going to be a generation, but if you are caring for a parent or a child, you're interested in is some flexibility and autonomy with your schedule. And that may be a perk that you offer in your hiring and recruitment strategy. So I'm feeling the parallel here with what we're talking about. Okay, so how does the definition of career readiness change? And what does it look like these days? What are employers actually looking for now?
Oh my goodness. This, again, another big, juicy question. I would say, and this is Chelsea's opinion, I think the phrase career readiness is being redefined as we speak. I think traditionally, when we have talked about career readiness, it is literally your readiness, knowledge, skills, and resources to start, to launch, to step into your career. The classes you've taken, the experiences you've had, the people who are in your corner, who have been at career and can guide you, the mentors, the advisors, all of that. Now, and data is showing us this, there is often a gap between a graduate's belief that they are career ready and that they embody the skills that are necessary to start career and what employers, managers would rate those skills to look like in practice. The National Association of Colleges and Employers does an annual study, their career competencies assessment across 8 different dimensions of career readiness. It's a powerful tool. Give them lots of kudos for doing that. But that is showing us that we have a disconnected line and a mismatch of student graduate readiness and employer experience of what they perceive when students get into their work or grads get into their work. And so I would say that today, why career readiness is a big fat question mark and why we're redefining it is for 2 reasons. Number one, we have so much massive change happening understatement. From technology to policy to globalization, I mean, everything as we know it is changing. And the rate of change is so incredibly fast that the concept of what do you need today, I would say it's going to be vastly different next year. It's certainly different from what we needed even in 2023 and 2024. And so career readiness to me must be fluid. The most important trait that I believe that any really professional at large, but specifically new to work person needs to have is agility, the ability to be agile, the ability to be flexible for those who need another word, right? The ability to not get so married to a job description. How many times have you heard people say, well, this was not on my job description. This is not what I signed up for. And while I understand people's frustration because sometimes you're saying yes because of that, the truth is in no organization today is it likely that what you were asked to do is what the org needs for where we are, especially with this AI transformation happening. And so I think, again, that's why we have to be fluid in our understanding of career readiness because of the need, because of change and the need for folks to be agile. And the second thing I would say that I don't think we talk enough about is there is this question about who is responsible for building career readiness, for supporting career readiness. There has been a decade plus long debate. Is it education institutions? Is it K-12? Is it higher ed? Is it employers? Is it families and parents and guardians? The truth is it's all. And that's why we're starting to see now some of the most transformative supports of career readiness are through public-private partnerships. where we are having nonprofits partnering with employers, partnering with think tanks, partnering with local and federal government. Apprenticeships is one example, because it truly does take a multitude of forces to ensure that there's readiness, both in terms of skill, but also meeting the human needs. And you brought this up earlier, the human needs that folks need to thrive in today's workplace.
I'm thinking about folks being married to their job descriptions or not, and being flexible with the changes, and then going back to being in different generations. You had said when you're like leading workshops, what's one word to describe how you might think of X generation or Gen Z? And I feel like I've heard this thought exercise before, and one that people use for Gen Z is having boundaries, which I love because that's good to have. This is where I fall into this trap of like, this could be a generalization. Not everyone has good boundaries. Just because you are of X generation does not mean that you have good boundaries. Maybe it's something that you would like to aspire to. But it did make me think about, how can you have good boundaries and be flexible? And maybe you're seeing these changes in a job description. This is just like a general thing. Maybe we just have to keep assessing and taking a look at what is our job role more often than 2 years, or I don't even know if there is a standard for that.
Yeah, such a good question. So relevant. First, we have to take a step back and think about, why is the concept of someone saying they have boundaries at work alarming to some people? Well, I would connect the conversation of boundaries to the broad growth of conversation and resources around wellness at work, mental health at work, which I'm going to be very honest. When I first left Spelman College and stepped into Wall Street, we were not talking about mental health and well-being. Okay. It was not as pronounced as it is now. There were little rumblings, but it's not like full programs and initiatives to support it, okay? And so I think one of the things, this is why the generational piece comes in, one of the things that we have to understand is we are having more mental health and well-being conversations at work, which opens the opportunity for the concept of boundaries to be talked about the way that it is. And so again, that is one of the shifts that I would say is happening generationally, where we never talked about it. You handle your business at home and I don't want to know what you're doing outside of work, to now we have employee resource groups. We have benefits that help support well-being at work. We have keynoters coming into our company offsites to talk about how to be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually strong. And so that is the first place we have to start. The conversation has emerged. Now, when we talk about boundaries and how to balance, last week, my team and I were at an offsite with a large nonprofit in New York City. We were leading an assessment and then a debrief with the people leader team. So we were doing the Globe Smart assessment, which is a culture work style assessment. Everybody took the assessment. We were talking about where folks mapped out on the kind of like output of the assessment and what that means for leading their teams and then bridging together as leaders to support the organization. And this very concept came up around, how do we balance individual style, individual leadership and experience with what a team or organization state are their norms and ways of working towards mission, as a nonprofit, mission of their organization. And that's where sometimes the friction bubbles. Why does the friction bubble? We may not have communicated team and organizational expectations across the board. If we haven't said, here's my expectation for how my team makes decisions, navigates through conflict, collaborates towards a goal, then it leaves people up to the interpretation that their way, their style, what they need, their boundary is final fact rule. And there's no shift or pivot that they need to make because they say, well, this is who I am, which you've heard, right? On the flip side, sometimes we haven't created the space for individual people's experiences and ways of working to be known and understood by those you work alongside and report into. And so I think what I'm getting at here is, for boundaries to be received, we do have to talk about how a team works and what's needed day to day under pressure. And for people to understand, yes, any place that we can make room for your style needs, your personal needs, we will do so. But there are some times where we just have to go by what's necessary for the collective and for those we're serving. in this case, a nonprofit. And so I think the boundary conversation, you got to be flexible to the concept of there are certain places where my boundary hopefully can be met, but it must be communicated, right? And there has to be dialogue around it, which doesn't always happen. And then there has to be this concept of, yes, this is a boundary that I hold near and dear, but there are times where, depending on what we're up against, I'm going to have to be flexible to that boundary in the work environment. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about any time that somebody would be under harm of any kind. I must say that, right? But I'm talking about the boundaries that we can be flexible around as it relates to self and how our impact also impacts our team and our org at large.
I feel like that's always the magical remedy. Maybe that's the theme I always see, is just having more explicit communication, more regular explicit communication. And the other one is to do a little pilot project of whatever the thing is that you want to test. That sounds like very good advice. I think I keep dancing around a question. And if our listeners are getting impatient with me, I want to make it explicit right now. What are some important facts that we should know about Gen Z and the workplace? You're saying things that I think apply across the board, and it's going to be relevant, this communication. But that being said, are there some things that we should just know?
There's a couple of things I would set the baseline of. First of all, who is Gen Z? Expected to represent 30% of the workforce by 2030. The youngest segment, I'm using the term youngest segment of the workforce today. Alpha generation will be the youngest in several years once they start to get into work. Okay, so that's important to know. Gen Z, typically, depending on the research report you use, were born after 96. Okay, we use Pew research is what we like to use, but sometimes depending on the study, it might be 97, but 96 is what we use and onward. So what's important for you to know? Sometimes I'll hear people say, those Gen Zers, and they'll be like pointing at middle schoolers. I'm like, those are Gen Zers, or elementary school, or infants. Gen Zers could be now 30 years old, which means they could be managing a team, managing a person, managing a program or initiative. So that's a big myth buster, that Gen Z are very young. Yes, they could be the ones who just graduated, but they could also be what I like to call full grown with full responsibilities, family, personal, et cetera. And so that's important for us to know. That's Gen Z. In terms of dynamics, and this is where I would get into generational analysis, which doesn't mean that this is the case for every Gen Zer, but these are some common practices observed across a segment. They are digital natives, which means that they grew up with technology being just the standard and norm for work and play, which has impacted attention spans. That's something we see often. There's the need for quick attention spans for learning and for communicating with Gen Z. Very much described as socially expressive, social impact committed, a part of causes. They are inclusive consumers, that term is used, meaning that they think about consumption of goods from the standpoint of brand alignment and affinity. Those are some things that have been studied. Gallup and the Walton Foundation did a study on Gen Z happiness. They're described to have the lowest mental health of any generation today. Okay. And so Walton and Gallup did a study on the root of that mental health. What is that from? What is that standpoint? And what they found was that the biggest indicator of happiness for Gen Zers is this concept of purpose, having a deep purpose and connection to school and work. It's this question, why? Why? What is in it for me? And these are questions we hear often when we are in workplaces supporting leaders in this next generation. All right, this is what I'm being asked to do. Why? I'm working on this project. It's tactical. It is an operational process day in and day out. How does this fit in the bigger puzzle to how our organization or team operates? Why am I doing this? Why are you asking me? And to some people, it's like, well, just do it. Remember, keep your head down. And so when there's a question about why, which is a purpose question, sometimes there's friction there, right? And so an understanding of why here's the big thing. Sometimes we can't even answer the why. And sometimes there needs to be transparency about that. But the big thing that I would say is that understanding of purpose and mission and connection are big drivers that I believe is actually a powerful thing that employers can lean into as they think about their brand, as they think about career pathing and development for their people. But it has to be communicated, back to that word we talked about.
Ooh, so much purpose. I love that. Again, a lot of these things could apply to hopefully more than just Gen Z. And I know that that is some of your work. Okay, but we're talking about early talent development right now. So let's just take that train of thought a little further for a moment. Our listeners are intentionally designing learning programs or performance support resources, or they're doing something. How can they incorporate some of this into their training design? How might that inform their work?
Ooh, this is one of my favorite questions. Totally geek out about this because we spend so much of our time supporting partners through this. I would go back to what I just mentioned are some dynamics about Gen Z, right? Digital native attention spans. Starting there alone when we think about design, how are we using technology within our programs, pre, during, post? How are we thinking about attention spans? This is why I love ATD, obviously micro learning. You have the certificate in that, right? Being able to understand how to support and create space for micro learning as a part of the programmatic experience for Gen Z is powerful, right? So those are some things that I would bring up. Obviously, and I know that depending on the audience, this is a big hot debate now, but inclusion is still relevant to the conversation for this segment. They are the most ethnically diverse generation yet. Alpha will be the first non-white US generation in history, okay? And so my point in this is not to debate, but my point in this is to state inclusion is the expectation for Gen Z. And so thinking about how inclusion, everything down to images we use, accessibility and design, speakers we may have come in. If I see it, I can be it is one thing I love to say. So people being able to see themselves in every speaker, every leader who comes in, every keynoter or facilitator who comes in, all of that is vital. When we're talking about inclusion, our scenarios and our examples, making sure we're thinking about the breadthness of the segment, it is that needed for this group because I can tell you, they will call you out. They will say, we missed it. Every week, I hear from a talent leader or from a Gen Zer who will say, I was a part of this program. I loved it, but this was not felt or seen. Are we always going to get it right? No. But can we design with them in mind, even include them in our design? Those are powerful ways that we can help to support the success of the program. Because one of the things, and I'll end with this, that we have seen time and time again from Gen Z is they will go and tell their peers through social platforms, in community conversations, if it was a thumb up or thumb down. And so the biggest cheerleader, the biggest ambassador and advocate you could have for your program success is those who are in the room and their ability to go and tell their peers. And so those are just a couple of things that I would offer.
Oh, I love it. So there can be a really fine line here. What if someone is listening to this and they're like, yes, microlearning, TikTok, all about it. How do we make sure that we're balancing some of the preferences that we see collected in some of the studies that you've been talking about? We don't fall back into these stereotypes of all of our training should be microlearning because they're used to being digitally native and they like videos, because that's not what you're saying.
Thank you for clarifying that because somebody will say, Chelsea said.
Yes, okay, I wanted to make it explicit that I
so appreciate it. Oh my goodness. We have to do that. No, we have to do that. So it's twofold. One, you as the talent leader working with your other stakeholders who obviously want this to be successful, so there is impact in teams and then in the organization, there are going to be some elements of how your organization leads development work that need to be true to your company, your industry, your sector, and to what success looks like for growth and development, right? So that is, again, the team and org norm that is like, this is why we've designed it this way, because this is helping to make sure that we are building the talent we need for our particular company. That is what it is. It's not debatable. So that is not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is where there is flexibility. If I'm doing a executive program, an emerging leader program, a new to work early career program, I'm hopeful that there are ways that I would shift the program to the needs of the audience. So what you can pivot, what you can expand and evolve, that's where I would take some of these nuances that I've mentioned that have been observed in Gen Z and seek to curate them into your content and your experience. Now, again, if you're piloting the program, the beautiful thing is that you can get feedback at the end of that during, and you can design it with Gen Z or early talent in mind. If it's a program that you've had for some time and you want to give it a nice, good facelift, have a focus group, include a couple of Gen Zers to be a part of it. And again, while you may not get it right for everyone, which is life, at least you can say that you included some stakeholders in the design and the facilitation, and that will go far. Okay. And so those are just some things that I would say. Manage your organization's needs and what you need for your sector, which Gen Zers haven't been there yet potentially, so they're not going to have that preview. And so this is our program designed because we're thinking about upskilling, reskilling, and the needs of the org. But here's how we've met your needs: by listening to you and curating content that's going to support you where you are. And that's important. I'm
thinking of my next question. And now something that you said in the conversation earlier is having me thinking about it, because I'm thinking of the 30-year-old who is a manager and maybe wouldn't consider themselves early talent. I think I was using that interchangeably. And so again, our listeners, forgive me as I'm still making sense of this and learning on the spot out loud. It's kind of messy because you've talked about policies and programs and practices, and we need to be explicit about that. Let's review them and really define this. I want to get to an example of one maybe that gets overlooked and has a big impact. The way I phrased this question was, what's one that gets overlooked but has a big impact on early talent? But now, as I'm thinking about that, I think I meant Gen Z, made the mistake of making them interchangeable, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. So this is a messy question.
It's so good. I love it. I'll give you two very quickly. One is around, and we've talked about it, because there are some very specific needs that Gen Z have. I mentioned mental health and wellbeing as one. And I know that there are people who want us to stop talking about mental health at work. I know, I hear it often. It would not be responsible to do that given what the data is telling us about this generation. I know people may not like it, but I have to be transparent. Yeah. And so I think organizations that want to see the total well-being of their people and keep them, retention means that people's needs are met and that they are feeling seen, valued, heard, supported. We need to look at our benefits and make sure that we have at least a robust amount of offerings that supports the different life moments. Let's use that instead. Life moments and periods that people have, right? And so that is a no-brainer that we should be doing that. Again, we can't meet every need, but going out to our people, making sure they have what they need in times of crisis and change and disruption is vital. That's part A, okay? Part B, and I know there will be some who disagree, but one policy/practice that I would reconsider is time in seat before a role change. Some organizations say you must be in your role for a year, 2 years, 16 months before you move to the next role. I get it in theory and practice, but I think if we are navigating through significant change and disruption as we are right now, and everything is a flux and a flow, you may risk keeping a talented early career professional in their seat because you say, nope, you got to be in that role for 6 more months. When there's a role that's become available for them that they would be great to do, they have demonstrated that they can do it, but you are stuck to this policy. And so that is an example of one. I hear it often, and I have actually heard from early career professionals who say, I got to leave. I'm going to take this offer because I want to stay at my org, but I can't give it 6 months. And again, to someone else, they might say 6 months goes by like this. But if you're thinking about your career differently and every moment mattering to you, then 6 months may not be worth the wait for you. And you may go elsewhere to seek out another opportunity, particularly if you have a very specific skill set, you're very talented, right? So I get people could say, well, the economy is not great, now go. But the principle of it is you could have kept a talented high performer in their seat, but you're stuck to this policy, which is you have to stay in your role for X amount of time, when you're also telling people they need to be flexible and agile.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to our job description conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, that is such great advice. And it feels like Well, it feels obvious. I hope that everyone is just nodding their heads and like, yep, we're on top of it. We're already doing that. Okay. What is your take on how managers should be prepared differently to lead and develop early career professionals? But I'm also going to lump in Gen Z because why not at this stage? Because now I feel that they're different.
Also depends on how people perceive and see themselves in their careers. But I get your point.
Okay.
So what should managers do? Managers should manage the individual. I say that often. There should be practices that are across the board to communicate, give feedback, navigate through conflict, will need to potentially be shifted depending on the individual that I'm connecting with, because people are different. Both their identity, their experiences, even work styles and work locations. If I'm talking about communicating with someone who is fully remote, we don't see each other, but at the annual company meeting versus someone who I might be seeing bi-weekly because we're in the same city, how we communicate, how we give feedback will oftentimes need to be shifted for that dynamic. And so when I think about early career professionals, I think one of the best things we can think about is a person who may still be navigating through their journey. They may not have had the time and the experiences that someone more seasoned may have, and the need to give the why. I'm going back to a lot of things I mentioned, the why behind particular asks or beyond their role, so they get how they fit into the nucleus of the organization in a way that somebody more seasoned may just get because they've been at this longer. And so I think that those are some very practical things. I would say managers thinking about or asking the question, what is in it for me? What is in it for your team as you work on a project, a process, an initiative? What is in it for your team? Saying yes to your org are all healthy things that you shouldn't guess, but you should be asking and seeking to understand if you want to retain and create a joyful, purposeful experience for your team.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question before we switch back to you. For someone listening right now and they could shift just one thing tomorrow to better support early talent, what would you recommend?
I would put to the side your expectations and thoughts around what success and career pathing looks like. You had your journey, even if you thought it was the bomb.com. It is very likely that now is a different environment in which even maybe what you experience isn't common practice anymore. And so be open to a different journey that your early career professionals might be taking and the need for you to meet them where they are. As one quick example, when I left college and I went to work on Wall Street, I was a part of what they call an initial training program. It was a boot camp we had during the summer before we got on the desk, joining our particular teams. It was 4 weeks of literally skill building, relationship building, Excel skills, business writing and communication skills. And it was such a beautiful journey into the world of work. Having left my home state, having moved to the big city, got my first apartment, I needed those weeks to help me prepare to stand up strong in my team. And I just think about those programs that were very popular in the mid 2000s, which are not as popular today. They are not as common for organizations to have this 4-week pre-internship, pre-full-time boot camp. Some of it because of cost, et cetera. But I just think if I expect a graduate today to step into their job without that support that I received, and for them to get it, not remembering that I had 4 weeks of support, I'd be missing the ability to connect to where they are, because technically I had a leg up in my journey and experience than they did. And so I think that's empathy and understanding that's necessary to support your team and to meet them where they are.
Yeah, that's the quote that I wrote down. Meet people where they are at. Be flexible, communicate, have empathy. We have so many good nuggets here. Can you tell us really quickly before we close out, how are you learning and growing? What are your goals lately?
Oh my goodness. How am I learning and growing? I'm a big podcaster. So I am learning and growing that I connect best outdoors. So I have been very intentional of carving out time every day to get outside, put my shoes on, get some movement in and listen to a podcast that is inspiring and uplifting. So that is a practical way that I'm growing with minimal cost investment. Also, even as a founder and CEO, carve in 2 to 3 professional development experiences every year from masterminds to conferences, ATD conferences, one I love, to the ability to be a part of boot camps that'll help focus on a specific skill. I think it's so necessary, particularly as we think about where we are, to consistently be skilling up and to be agile and flexible to the needs of, in our case, our partners and clients, but also my growth as a leader.
Oh, I love it. I feel like anyone listening could steal that, even if they're not a founder of their own company.
100%.
They would like to be. Maybe that's a good way to get yourself ready for that. Thank you so much, Chelsea. It was such a pleasure to chat with you and learn from you today.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. And folks, we'll link some resources, some white papers for those who might be interested in learning more about intergenerational strategies in Gen Z. And I welcome you to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from the Association for Talent Development. Be sure to check the show notes for resources mentioned in today's episode. And if you found the show useful or insightful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague.